If you've clicked on this video, then I'm willing to bet that at some point in your life, you've wanted to do magic full time. It's one of those thoughts that crosses all of our minds at some point. How could I turn this hobby that I'm doing into a job? And when I thought about who would be best to get on to talk about this topic, my mind immediately went to Chris Wilder. Most of you won't have heard of Chris. He's not super well known within the magic community, but all you have to know about him is that aside from being an excellent performer, he also runs several incredibly successful magic businesses. One of which is the Curious Cabaret, which is a monthly show, and that's how I first met him. In this video, Chris is going to show you how you can go from a beginner magician to a full-time pro. And if you are already a full-time pro, he'll show you how you can reframe the way you think about making money so that you can expand your business further. These are just two of the topics which he covers alongside momentum, how to grow your social media and networking, and many other things as well. And this video alone has completely changed how I think about making money with magic and the business side of it. So I really hope you enjoy this. I won't speak any further. I'll let Chris do all the rest of the talking. And if you did enjoy this, then feel free to check out the full conversation I have with Chris, which is linked down below in the description. Enjoy.
I'll try and make this as helpful as possible. It may not be a full comprehensive guide, as I said, but I'll try and give you some of the things that I've learned along the way and things that hopefully are distilled down into a really useful piece of information. I can't claim credit for lots of the things you're going to hear from me. I tend to read a lot of books, so I read as well as magic books, and I guess this could be the first point. I would say read around subjects. So I read a lot of business books. I read all sorts of different things. I can recommend a few at the end, or we can put some in the link at the end perhaps that are useful reading, just to understand business. I listen to YouTube videos, I listen to social media of people who are in business sectors. So I don't just listen to magic kind of social media channels and podcasts, but I actively listen to people who are experts in marketing, who are experts in sales, who are experts in kind of brand message, all those kind of things, and pull from those areas and pull from those industries into what we do, and use that to advantage. So I'd say, read other books, read outside of yourself, and get to know, if you're serious about business, get to know business, as well as kind of working on being a performer, being a magician. You've got to set aside some time within your working week to learn the business side of show business, and it may not stay like that forever. So as you grow in business, you may find there are some things that you're better at than other things. So if you are a performer and you want to be a performer, you probably want to get to the stage where that is what you're doing, if that's what you love and if that's what you're good at which point you can then delegate the tasks that you're perhaps less good at, or you don't want to spend as much time on, to other people. When business gets to a certain size, you can employ other people. One person I'll mention at this point, and I highly recommend you go and look up his stuff online. You can find a lot of his things on YouTube. He has a channel called The Futur, which is spelt without the E on the end, so it's Futur. And The Futur is a company run by a guy called Chris Do. One of the most important lessons I think I took from him was a discussion he had where he talked about the difference between cost, price, and value. And this is probably a big mistake I imagine lots of magicians will make when they start out in business, and it's getting the definition between those things wrong. So let me explain. So cost is how much it costs for you to sell a product or to offer a service. So for example, as magicians, if you are doing a gig somewhere in the country, you will have the cost of getting to the gig, so the travel. If it's a particularly long way away, you may have to pay for accommodation. There's the material costs, so if you're using props, decks of cards, things that are perishable, things that if you need a new deck of cards for every performance, maybe you've got giveaways, whether that's if you're doing children's shows or if you're doing larger shows, walk around, there'll be a material cost of you doing that gig. You have costs associated with how you got that sale in the first place, whether that's advertising, and then finally your time. So the time that it takes for you to go do that gig, perform, and come back, and so your time has an associated value. And if you add all those things up together, that is the cost of sale. That's how much it costs to do that gig. Now, if you go out and you charge the customer, the client, that price, let's say it's £100 just for ease and for argument's sake, if you charge them £100 and it costs you £100 to do that gig, then you're not actually doing business. You've just paid yourself for the time to get there. And to just to really emphasize that, what happens if you are ill? If you're ill, you've committed to that gig and you're now ill, you can't do it. So you either cancel on the client and they have to find somebody else, damages your reputation, or you have to provide somebody to do the gig in your place. So they've got that money's got to go to them. And if we've already said, okay, it's going to cost this, and this to do the gig, and you're paying the person's time, well, basically all that money is going to go to that person. You need a whiteboard. Do you want a whiteboard? Should we do a whiteboard? Let's do a whiteboard. Look at this.
Let's do a whiteboard. Oh, look at this.
Can you tell that I used to be a teacher? So,
okay. Hopefully the camera can see this.
So cost. So you've got your travel, you've got accommodation, you've got time, you've got materials, okay, etc.
Okay.
Let's say this costs £300. Now your price, so this is the price to the customer. So let's say you're going to charge the customer £500. And the difference between these two, so 500 minus 300, which is 200. So this is your profit. So your £200.
Yep.
Now I can pay myself out of this. So I've attributed £150 to the time. I can pay myself £150 and I've still got a profit of £200. But the point is that I've got money that's in excess of the cost of sale.
Yep.
And the reason that this is important is because that money can then be used to reinvest back into the business. And I think a lot of magicians tend to, or at least from what I find, can go out and just charge the cost price. You're kind of living out of your pocket essentially, because you're just balancing, it costs me this to do the gig, I've done the gig, and it doesn't go anywhere. You're just paying yourself for your time.
Yeah.
The last word that Chris Do talks about in that definition is value. And the value, he says, is determined by the customer, which is how much they're willing to pay for you. And this is probably one of the most important, this idea of value, I think, is one of the most important things to think about in terms of business, especially when you're starting off and it comes to when people ask you to do gigs for free or for charity or things like that. The value is what you can charge the customer. It's a perceived quantity. So if the client thinks you're worth £500 and they're happy to pay £500 for you, great. You may only think you're worth £450, but if they're willing to pay £500 for you, brilliant. And the value is to do with what you're giving the client, what they're getting from you, how much value it is to them as a customer. So, and that's the experience that you're giving for their guests. If that's a trade show, it'll be thinking about what business return are they going to get on that investment. So they're going to be, they're going to be wanting to get clients. Once you've got that number though, let's stick with £500 just to keep it easy. My value is £500 and I know that that's the worth I can give to that customer. If somebody then comes to you and says, I've only got a budget of £200, can you do this gig for me? You've got a couple of options here. The easiest option, and the one I would probably avoid, is to say, oh yeah, sure, I'll do it for £200. Because now your value is not £500, it's £200. And you've devalued yourself. One of the options you can have is you can say, no, my value is £500, that's what I charge. And you can be confident in that. And I think as you get more experienced in business and you become comfortable and happy with what it is that you charge, it becomes easier to say, well, no, this is the price. You wouldn't go to like an Apple store, for example, and say, oh, that MacBook costs £2,000, but I can only afford £600.
They're not going to give you that.
No, they're not, because they know the value of the product. And so if you know your cost of sale, like I can't do that work for less than my cost of sale, because otherwise I'm losing money. So I've got to hit that. But then the other option, and this is helpful, especially if you're starting out, is if my value is £500 and they say we've got £200 to give you, can I find £300 of value to make up the difference in some other way? So, for example, is there going to be a photographer there? Is there going to be a videographer there? Can they guarantee that, okay, I'm going to get all of the photos from that photographer, from that videographer, that I can then use for my own marketing? Why is that valuable? Well, because if I brought my own photographer, which sometimes I do, or bring your own videographer, I'm paying them. And that's another cost to me. But if they're providing it, I don't have to pay that cost. So, okay, like that's another maybe £200 of value from photos and video. Can I get free dinner? Can they pay for my travel? Can they pay for my accommodation? Can they refer me to another client Is there a strategic advantage to this gig? I'd be very wary of the exposure thing. Do this for exposure, because you've got that number in your head now. You can say, well, am I going to get £300? Well, actually, more than £300. Am I going to get £1,000 worth of exposure from this £200 gig? And if you can kind of say, well, yeah, I definitely am, then okay, maybe it's worth doing. But typically, that term exposure is banded around by somebody just trying to get something for free, because they're not going to give you that amount of value in exposure. Is that helpful?
Yeah,
it's like a helpful metric, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
In terms of just having those, being really clear on your numbers. In terms of what does this cost me to do this gig? Got to make sure that I pay myself, and for you to be able to kind of build that momentum in business and to kind of keep growing and going forward, you've got to make profit. So that then with profit, then you've got lots of options become available to you. You've now got the capacity to make decisions with this money and how you use it strategically to grow the business.
And then on top of that, you've got to balance value from the customer's point of view as well.
Yeah, exactly. So with that in mind, let's just take a slight gear change. Okay. So how do you start? I guess, how do you start into business? Typically, most people come into business either having a previous job, and they will maybe, and this is how I got into business. It was, I already had another job. I reduced my hours and slowly built up the business so that I had enough work coming in to be able to then eventually go full time, and for it to be sustainable. So if you've got another job, I would encourage people to work out what your monthly bottom line is, whether, rent, utility bills, food costs, internet, Netflix subscription, whatever those things are, and make sure include some things in there that are going to, make your life happy and not miserable. Be realistic about it. But whatever that number is, that's your bottom line. And I would suggest meeting that through your main job. Then your business, your magic business on the side, essentially that just becomes extra.
Yep.
And that is there just to kind of build the business. And you don't have to worry about meeting your bottom line. That money can all be invested back into the business.
Yep.
And keep investing into the business and keep growing that until you've got enough customers and enough traction, enough cash flow into the business. If you're going into the magic business without having a previous job, you've either got to have significant cash flow immediately. So you've got to get that kind of those leads up and running really quickly, or you've got to have some capital investment going into the business to start with. And I would probably suggest that is the sensible thing. I think if you start from nothing, you're going to find that very, very hard. And that might be money that you've managed to save from a previous job. That might be, or savings, in your life. That might be that you've got a generous benefactor or an investor, or it may be that you take a small business loan. So let's talk about momentum. This is one of the things that I have in my head when I think about all different areas of business, whether that's contracts, whether that's people, networks, and so forth. So momentum is how do you use where you are now as a stepping stone to get to the next thing. So going back to that example of, you get your gig, you paid £500. We could just go, great, paid £500, done, money in the bank. Okay, how am I going to find my next gig? And you start from scratch again. Whereas if you have an idea of momentum, you can think of how do we use that scenario as a stepping stone to the next thing. The really easy option is handing out business cards and marketing to the people who are out there. You're advertising your services. As magicians, we have an amazing ability for people to get to see the product. They're seeing exactly what they're getting, and there's loads of people. If it's a big event, there's loads of people seeing this. There may be people there who want to hire a magician. So there's that opportunity to market to those other people. I think just being mindful that there may be, you may decide, okay, there's in a gig of 200 people, there may be 3 or 4 people there who are the kind of people you want to work with. That might be people who are going to book you, but there may be people who know things that you don't know. So there may be strategic business value in the people that you meet. If you meet an agent or you meet somebody who's great at social media or a marketer, just I think be on the lookout for how you can stepping stone to the next thing. If you do give out business cards, if you do exchange with people, I would also recommend take their business card, and so you can contact them. Don't wait for them to get in touch with you. And the other thing I'd recommend you do is when it's still fresh in your memory about the conversations you've had, write on the back of the business card 2 or 3 things about that person that you've had in conversation. So something that you've mentioned, you might have a great memory, you may be able to remember all these things, But then that way, when you reply to them in the email, you can say, oh, it was great talking to you at such and such an event. And you can mention some of the things that you talked about because you've written them down. And it shows that you're invested, you're interested in the person. I'm not saying use this as a manipulation, I'm just saying we are forgetful. We talk to hundreds of people in the gigs that we do. So kind of write these bits of information down, because then you can maintain those relationships. Let's talk about social media and networking. So these are kind of two strategies that you could use for finding leads. I'm really bad at social media. I don't like social media. I kind of see it as a bit of a necessary evil. I kind of get that. And I see a lot of magicians who are amazing, yourself as such a person. No. Certain magicians who are doing a really good job at their social media in terms of presenting a really great kind of picture to people around them. People see it, they get excited, and they book them. That's brilliant. And if you're good at that, great, do that. I think if you can take a camera, somebody who's got a camera, or somebody's got the ability to video you at a gig, get that footage, stick that on your social media, brilliant. One of the things I always do at gigs, just sidetrack, is if somebody says, can I film? And I say, yeah, of course you can. At the end, I'll say, could I get a copy of that? And get them to airdrop it to me, or WhatsApp or something like that. And then I can then use that footage in some other way. So yeah, a lot of people are really good at social media and can go down the route of kind of posting lots on social media, spending time in video editing and working out thumbnails and all that stuff. And it's just such a time sink, I think. And I don't necessarily feel like I have the time to do that. There'll probably come a point where I kind of employ people to do that for me. The way that I get most of my business is through a completely different strategy, which is through networking. So I spend a lot of time networking and meeting people, whether that's networking events, just talk. And by networking, I just mean talk to people. So talk to people about what they do, about what you do, about what's exciting in your business, and then natural partnerships just kind of tend to spring up. So when you're doing a gig, be interested in other people, be asking questions. We have a job that is inherently fascinating. If you go to a networking event, somebody says, oh, I'm an accountant, I'm a lawyer, oh, I'm a professional magician, oh really? And immediately there's all manner of questions. So there will be, if you spend time in networking, you will meet people that you might want to work with. But people who network a lot, they share contacts, they'll recommend people. And there's nothing better than a referral where somebody says, I've seen this amazing magician at a network event. And that's a great way of getting bookings, but it's a great way of just casting the net much wider. And that's how I get a lot of the work that I do. So I would say leverage your network. You can do both. If you're good at social media, do social media. If you're good at networking, do networking, or do both. But I would recommend networking. And the last thing I can think of, I'm sure there are many other things that maybe will come out in a longer conversation we have later. Yep. The last thing that I can think of is something I heard Paul Martin say recently, actually. So he runs all sorts of courses and things to help magicians. But something he said, he had this quote, which was, be the person you need to be. And what he meant by this was, if you're going to present yourself as a professional magician, then be a professional magician. Don't just say, oh, I'm thinking about being a professional magician. No, have confidence in, no, this is what I do, and play that role. If you want to be a director, then play the role of director. Don't say, oh, I'm thinking about maybe directing some shows one day. No, say, actively pursue that goal. So I'm a director of shows, I'm working on this project, these are the steps that we're taking, this is how we're going to get to that end goal. I guess what I'm saying is be serious about what it is that you're doing, and this is kind of a permission to do the thing. I'm not talking about kind of lying to people, but I'm talking about being given permission. I think sometimes I've found that I almost need permission to get on and do the thing. And so this is me giving you permission to kind of be that person, to have the confidence and to kind of take things seriously. So how do you actively do that? Well, if you want to be a professional magician, let's say you have some goals in mind. Let's say in a year's time, you want to get out of your full-time job and you now want to be working full-time as a magician. How do we get there? What would that look like? How much money would I need to be earning? And kind of figure out what that looks like, and then work backwards from that and say, okay, so in 12 months, I want to be earning £30,000 for argument's sake. So, okay, so I need to earn this amount of money per month. So that means I need to be getting this number of gigs. And you can work back, and you can actively be thinking about the steps that you would need to put in place. And they can sometimes be quite small steps. And then you can actively then be serious about pursuing those steps in business. and like we said, building on the momentum that you've got. You get 1 gig, okay, let's try and turn that into 2 gigs. Yeah, be serious about what you want to do, be the person you need to be, and just crack on. Don't feel nervous about it, but just give it a good go.
Well, I mean, that was a masterclass. There's so much stuff in there, and so much good stuff in there.
I think these are things that I know. These are hopefully it'll be helpful to some people. Hopefully there'll be some nuggets in there that people can use, depending on where you're at in business. Feel free to reach out if there's any questions people have.
I'll link all of his socials and website and everything else down below.
Yeah.
So you can find all that. And if you have enjoyed listening to Chris and you've got some value from this, then consider checking out the full interview, which will be out a few days after this. We're going to go way more in depth on this stuff. We'll be talking a lot about business stuff. We'll be talking about all sorts of other things, and it's going to be really good. So stick around for that. And thanks, Chris. Thanks for sharing all your advice for free on YouTube.
Yeah,
How good is this?
Yeah, it's
Think about that for a value proposition.
Yeah.